Hello from unfortunately a quite rainy and dreary Taipei. That's not why I'm talking to you. I wanted to talk to you now to briefly introduce the next discussion that's coming up, and this discussion is between me and Philippe Loquet. And Philippe Loquet is the guy that has to do with everything tech in terms of translation. He has a channel called Translation Tech Corner. He's done a couple videos on my channel about cat tools. And anyway, we're going to be talking about ChatGPT and AI as it pertains to translation. As many of you know, the last book I wrote was written using ChatGPT, and I have a couple videos on how to create a resume and a cover letter using ChatGPT and stuff like that. His experience is a bit more formal. He was involved in a study where they did translations with ChatGPT and with different glossaries and TMs and super interesting stuff. So we're going to be talking about that. That's part one of our discussion. Part two will be the future of ChatGPT and AI in terms of translations and translators. Should we care? How much should we care? Should we worry or not worry, etc., etc.? And so we're going to get into it and as to how it can affect us as translators, because we've always had stuff like machine translation and stuff, but things are a bit different now. So anyway, both discussions are very much worth it. I thought they were very interesting. Part one will start right now as soon as I, shut up. And part two is on his channel. It's in the description below. You'll find the link. So without any further ado, I'll let you get into it. Okay, see you there. My experience using ChatGPT, and more specifically how I used it to write my book, basically. Yeah. And what I did was, ChatGPT did not write my book. It cannot write a book by itself. But what I was able to do was, I knew I had the material for my book, and I knew I wanted to create a book. I had known about this for a while, but I just thought it would take a long, long time, because I had a course out there called How to Set Up a Translation Agency. And the notes were all over the place because I'd done my notes originally, but then it'd been updated over the years. And so, the notes were a mess. But I had captions from this course. And so what I was able to do was I was able to literally just take the captions, and then on ChatGPT, I would do it chapter by chapter. And, I say, create a chapter called whatever the name of the chapter is based on this text. And then I would just paste the text there, and it will create a chapter for me based on the information that was there. And so it's a bit tedious, but I did this for each chapter. And I think there were about, I can't remember, 30 something chapters. That way I was able to basically create a book. Now, obviously later I, then reread through the whole thing and made sure it made sense. I also rearranged things because in a book I wanted it to be in a different order and do it in a different way. But this saved me a ton of time, because otherwise I'd have to rewrite it from scratch. And I found this very interesting that it was able to do something like this. I think our experience with ChatGPT is quite different. Mine has been purely from just messing around with it and experimenting, trial and error and stuff like that. I think yours is a bit more scientific. At the beginning, I was taking out the timestamps, but then I tried it with the timestamps. It made no difference. It deletes the timestamps. It doesn't even take them into account. I don't have to reformat anything. And I literally just copied and pasted, and it did its own chapters. Every now and then it would try to take information that I had not written and add it in. And so it would do stuff like, oh, if you want to market, you should try this, this, and that. I'm like, I didn't mention that. And so I had to sort of correct it there. So that was interesting as well. But yeah, by and large, it was a very interesting experiment that worked out. And, the book launched 2 days ago. And so I was finally able to do it after more than a year that I've been wanting to do it, thanks to GPT. Just briefly, because I said I was messing around with it, and I know I've did a bit of this in my videos. Other things that I messed around with were stuff like I would take my resume and I would plug it in, and I would say, write a cover letter based on this resume, and then I just copy and paste my resume, and then it would write a cover letter. And then I could, because you can add on to it, and so I would say, now make this geared toward a freelance translation job, a freelance financial translation job, and so then it would emphasize the financial aspect of my resume in the cover letter. And so it's quite interesting that I can do stuff like that. So yeah, anyway, just an example of some of the experiments I've been doing with ChatGPT.
That's amazing. I was just thinking about the way you tackled it. I think it's very interesting. So you said you took captions from the course, and that's what you fed. So captions is the way you talk. It's something that's very natural. It's not exactly like written text. So I was wondering what kind of style of writing did GPT throughout when you asked it to write something?
So yeah, it was the captions. Yes, they were automated captions, by the way. So they were just based on how clearly I spoke. So there were some things like anytime I said prose, it would write it PROS instead of PROZ, and stuff like that. But otherwise it was fine, and the style pretty much matched me when I speak, I guess. To me, like I didn't find myself having to change anything in style. And I say this also because I experimented in other times, like I would have it write something and I would say, now write it in the style of Tim Ferriss or write in the style of Seth Godin or stuff like that. And it would change the style noticeably, and you could tell. But I didn't feel the need to really do much of anything here. Sometimes it was a bit dry and very fact-based, and so I added stuff, but I'm not sure if that was me being very dry when I speak, or if that was ChatGPT itself. But I found by and large it just matched my style in essence. I don't know if that was on purpose or not.
Oh, that's very interesting. I was wondering about that actually. So that's very nice. Did you at any moment when you were feeding context to ChatGPT, did you get like a message like you can only add so much context or something like that? Or
yes, at the beginning I tried taking literally so I literally downloaded all the captions and I tried pasting them all in at once and I wrote create a book based on this text, and it said too much information. So then I just did it chapter by chapter, which was easier too because I didn't have to download it. I took it directly from where it pops up on the program. So yeah, I mean there is an upper limit. I'm not sure what it is. I didn't experiment too much with that, but yeah, there is one obviously.
So that's interesting. Yeah, I'm asking that because there's a big difference in the amount you can add as context between what is GPT-3 and what will be GPT-4. I was just double checking that this morning, and you can have 3,000 tokens for context in GPT-3, so that's what you used.
Right.
And for GPT-4, that will be 25,000 tokens.
Oh wow.
So no contest.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's immense. Like if you compare both, because I was wondering when as you did it chapter by chapter, did you have to restart it? So tell it we're starting something else from scratch. You could just reuse your previous context.
I could use my previous context, and in fact, I realized that it remembered previous stuff because I would have a short chapter where maybe anyway it talks about something different, but then it would mention something like as mentioned before, or in light of this and that. So it actually and ChatGPT does this in several ways. I'm sure 4 does even better, but it remembers what you wrote, so you can build off of it. Like I said, you could say now make it like now do it in the voice of Tim Ferriss, or now make this for a financial translation job. Like it builds off whatever you wrote before, and so it's and it did this here even without my asking. It kind of remembered information from earlier on.
So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good help. So that time saving. You gain from that, as you were explaining. Writing a book is an endeavor. It takes time. I never did it, but I imagine, because when I prepare material for a course or something like that, it takes me forever. But yeah, for writing a book, I can see ChatGPT being a nice help for that.
Yeah, and again, it's because I already had the information somewhere. I think if you write it from scratch, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but yeah, ChatGPT, it can't come up with its own stuff really, and it can give you various options, and it can change the style. It can do a lot of cool stuff like that. But if you rely on it to do all your homework, then it's not going to work out well. I'm curious to hear about yours. I mean, do you have any other questions about mine? Otherwise, I'm curious to hear about your experience. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Yeah, that was nice.
Because you actually experienced translation with ChatGPT, and so I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah. So I was called to I was called actually to work on for somebody that was doing experiments with ChatGPT, so an MT researcher. So that's a paper that's being prepared and that will be used and presented at EAMT later this year. And basically, the experiment was comparing the quality and the use of specific glossaries and specific translation memories when using ChatGPT. So I had already done some tests on my own, looking at what was the translation quality, and it was very good. And I sort of my curiosity before getting into that had already been aroused, because somebody was asking me what you think about the style of that empty output, and that was like somebody that had, or an agency that had a custom twist on how they used ChatGPT, and the result style-wise was very nice, and that was with GPT-3, and then getting into that scientific paper, what I found very interesting is that you were coercing ChatGPT into using a special set of words for translating a sentence. So you were asking it to do two things. So first, find if you recognize those words in the source sentence, and then force it to use those words in the output. The translation that's in the glossary, use that in the output. And so that the results were actually pretty good. You did see some nice improvements in some instances. In some other, it would just tank, and it would be very bad, or it would hallucinate sometimes when you asked it too much. So, for example, if you had a short sentence and you were asking like 5 glossary terms to be recognized and included in the target translation, sometimes it would not be able to do it, because it wouldn't make sense sometimes in a linguistic perspective. And then it would hallucinate a second sentence just to be able to include that. And you could see that the second sentence was just something that was probably grabbed directly from the TM it's been trained with for that. So the results were quite mixed, and especially when forcing it to use a translation memory, sometimes you didn't get. You were actually decreasing the quality of the language output that it would come up with already. Yeah, so sometimes it would be just better in some instances to have it do its own thing, and then correct it after the fact. If you were using it to save time as a translator, for example, well, it would, in some instances, it would be better just to let it do its thing and then maybe change 1 or 2 words. But if you were coercing it too much, then you would actually have to rewrite full portion of a sentence or something like that.
Well, sorry, so let me understand. If you're coercing it in that sense and you wanted to use certain terms in the target text, but these terms are terms that you already know exist in the source text, or?
Yeah, it's, well, you give it a glossary to remember.
Right.
Okay, and you tell it translate that text using that glossary. Okay, so then not every sentence in will have terms in the glossary always, but you select sentences that had terms that were recognized in the glossary, and then you forced it to use these terms for translation.
Okay. So basically you say, if you have the word this, then always use this. But and sometimes you didn't have the word this, but it would still try to use that word in the target language. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, actually what I'm saying is if there was the source term recognized, the problem is that we know as translators that a word won't always get the exact same translation because of context. So,
right.
and that's the limiting factor for a glossary, because it's very hard to have a system where you would have one source text and then all the options of translating that word, you know, so one source word and then all the options, and have a machine correctly pick based on context the word it should use. You know, so sometimes you know, you had the glossary with a word that, you know, you want it to be translated in a specific way, and you tell it, well, this word, you know, it means this. So okay, and so you'd ask the robot to use that word, but then from when you read that sentence, it shouldn't have been translated like that. So the robot obeyed what you asked it to do, but then it didn't make sense because it should have been a different target term, although the source term was correct, you know.
Right. So
it's like if you use the word, the verb run, you know, it would have several meanings, you know, depending on or pool. Same thing for pool, it changes, right. You know. So if you force it to use just one way of translating that specific verb, then you can see the problem that it will make depending on the context.
Right. So like if I want to translate, I say glasses is lunettes, but then it'll have like glass, and then it'll translate that the other way. Okay, right. So were most of these mistakes like quite obvious for a translator to notice? Or...
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. Yeah. That wouldn't be, yeah, that's something that you would notice straight away. So I think that's the problem with these models. They're excellent. You know, they're already very good. You'd have to see for different language pairs, but for big language pairs that have a lot of data already available, they're very good. But when you come into languages pairs that have less data available, I haven't tested that, but I'm guessing it won't be as good. But yeah, for most language pairs, especially when one of the languages is English, you usually get very good results. And if you try to coerce it more, well, then you know, it will depend. Sometimes it will work. For example, if you use vocabulary terms that are specific to a field, let's say you're translating stuff about medical equipment. Right. There's very little chance that the target term will be mistaken or won't be a match for that specific context, because there's not many things in life that will come against that, especially if that's equipment, like solid stuff, you know. So that's, everything will have a specific name and be used in a specific context. So that won't be a problem, and that will actually be a plus. So you will benefit from that glossary. But depending if your glossary is made up of terms that can have different translations in several contexts, well, then you will be actually damaging the quality of the output.
Sorry, actually, I want to step back here, because for adding the glossaries, like we were talking about this isn't in the prompt, is it? Like how do you teach it, or, you know, to use a certain glossary for a translation? Like,
so for that specific paper, I don't have that data, so I can't answer because I was blind to it, okay, which was part of the experiment. It's only after the fact that we discussed a few of these things. But
so it's its own API. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Right. But if you wanted to do it with the prompts, I suppose you could. You know, it's a bit the same thing as what you were explaining with. I haven't tested it, but I'm guessing the way it works, it shouldn't be a problem. Just tell tell the ChatGPT, well, this is a glossary, upload the glossary, translate these sentences using the glossary I uploaded above. That's, it will just recognize the terms and replace them. So yeah. I think that's what we'll probably be discussing later, but it's all about knowing what it can do and knowing how to make it do something. And when you're coercing it, knowing if you will actually get what you want in the end or not, and what saves you time. So with those kinds of, they're built like assistants. So when using that kind of tools, because translation is it's something that's a very specified area of that, because things like ChatGPT, they're built to be assistants, not only for translation. It's different than DeepL, ModernMT, and all those tools that they're built specifically for translation, and you use them in a pipeline that is dedicated to translation. Whereas ChatGPT, it's amazing with language, and it does too provide a system for translation, but it's not doing only that. So there's that aspect.
And how would you say it compares to DeepL or to some of these other ones that are specifically for translation?
Yeah, so I'm guessing that later we will, or maybe there's some articles already around about that, but I'm guessing that later this year we'll get some that will do these comparisons, for and for example, I like the Intento MT report that comes out every year. Very good. They compare very scientifically specific outputs for machine translation, sometimes using a specific context and comparing them to see how they perform depending on the language pair and depending on the field of activity that you're asking them to translate. From what I've seen, I would say that ChatGPT is already on par with the level of big translation engines like DeepL, and so it's already in the same level. From my perspective, from what I've seen and what I've translated, I'd say it's already on the same level of the upper tier, like the upper 2 or 3 that you would put. What I would like to see checked is for German, because I know German can be very difficult in a pair for translation, for machine translation. So I would like to see how it compares with that, for example, comparing it with DeepL, which is very good at German pairs. So that would be something interesting to do. But from the pairs I understand, well, I've seen it being like it would be in my top 3, no problem.
So, and I have to say, actually, my wife has been using it to translate articles. She's been having to do this research on wine and found articles only in English. She prefers to read in Chinese, in traditional Chinese. And she just tried it. Obviously, she's not a translator, so she can't really compare it. She hasn't used DeepL or anything, but she kept saying, she's like, wow, this is really good. Wow, this is really good. So yeah, she was impressed just as, as a layperson using it.
Yeah, for me, that's it. That's my main takeaways from that. It's like, if you want to use it, it will give good results. And if you want to coerce it into using your specific language data, well, make sure you're using data that will have been prepared in such a way that will give you the best translation results.
Right. And and I agree. And I think the best way is basically to play around with it. Yeah. And for me, at least, it was trial and error, but you can also see what other people have done. There's starting to be a lot more material on the web about it. And one thing to avoid, I see a lot of people complaining, saying like, I asked it this and that question, and then it gave me the wrong answer. It said, oh, use ChatGPT if, but only if you don't care about, whether it tells you the truth or not. ChatGPT isn't there for that. And it's not Wikipedia or Google or anything like that. And in fact, when ChatGPT 4 first came out, when ChatGPT Plus came out, I saw it on the sideline, ChatGPT Plus. I asked ChatGPT, what is ChatGPT Plus? And I think I have the screenshot somewhere, and it replied, there is no ChatGPT Plus. ChatGPT is free, and it only has one level. So I replied, I said, it says ChatGPT Plus right there in the sidebar. And then it said, oh, ChatGPT Plus offers extra blah, blah, blah. But so, that's the thing. If it isn't good necessarily at giving you facts, because I feel like a lot of people use it for something like that. And but several times, people have been tripped up because, especially if it's not very well known things, it's good at sounding pretty intelligent, but what it tells you won't necessarily be true. But what it is good at is, like we said, taking data and, reformulating it, working with it, doing what needs to be done. Like you said, like an assistant. And so, it's very good at that. So this was a very interesting talk, I feel, on the capabilities so far of ChatGPT, which is still very new, but it's still very interesting to see what we've been able to do with it, and how it can be used, and how we've been able to use it. And now the part 2 of the discussion, we're going to talk about what it can be used in the future, and how in the different ways it can change many things in the future. And so we'll get into that in part 2. But otherwise, thanks again for your experience. And it's going to be published soon. So that's very interesting. And like I said, you have good formal experience. I've just been messing around with it a lot. And so, it's interesting to see these 2 points of view.
Yeah, that was nice looking into it.
Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. That was the end of part 1 of our discussion. For part 2, click down in the link below, and you can go to Philippe's channel, Philippe Loquet, and Translators Tech Corner. That's his channel, where we have part 2 of this discussion, and we talk about the future of AI, ChatGPT, etc., etc., etc. So check it out.